Many people set goals like losing 20 pounds or getting better grades, but what if these common goals aren't actually behaviors that can be directly changed? This seemingly simple distinction is fundamental in applied behavior analysis, where precisely selecting and defining target behaviors isn't just a technicality, but the very foundation for creating meaningful, lasting change. Lily, how does this field approach such a critical first step?
Daniel, you've hit on a core principle. Applied behavior analysis aims for predictable, replicable improvements in behavior. But it's not just any behavior. We focus on socially significant behaviors that have immediate and long-lasting positive effects on an individual's quality of life and for those around them. This includes everything from language and social skills to motor and academic abilities. As researchers Lerman, Iwata, and Hanley put it in 2013, specific target behaviors are usually selected because they will improve a person's quality of life in the short and the long term by allowing the person access to new reinforcers and additional reinforcing contexts. It's truly the essential first step.
So it sounds like more than just observing what someone does. Behavioral assessment goes deeper. What's the fundamental difference between this and, say, a traditional psychological assessment that might identify a person's strengths and weaknesses?
That's an excellent point. Traditional psychological or educational assessments often use norm-referenced tests, observations, and anecdotal reports to look at a learner's cognitive, academic, or social domains. Behavioral assessment, on the other hand, uses both indirect and direct procedures, like interviews and checklists, to identify and define very specific target behaviors. The key difference is its focus on uncovering the functional relations between variables. We're not just describing deficits, we're trying to understand why a behavior occurs. As Wacker and colleagues indicated in 2011, the principal goal is to identify environmental variables that are related to increases or decreases in target behavior. Or, to put it more succinctly, as Linehan did in 1977, to figure out what the client's problem is and how to change it for the better.
That shifts the perspective entirely from classifying abilities to understanding function. Before even thinking about interventions, are there preliminary considerations a behavior analyst must address? Like, can anyone just decide to assess someone's behavior?
Definitely not. There are two crucial pre-assessment questions. First, the analyst must have the authority, permission, resources, and skills to complete an assessment and intervene. You can't just walk into a situation and start analyzing behavior. The example given is a behavior analyst witnessing a disruptive child in a checkout line. They do not have the authority to intervene on the spot, but they would if it were a prearranged coaching session. Second, it's vital to review existing records, medical, educational, historical data, to understand what's been tried before. This also means ruling out medical reasons for unusual behavior. A child's behavior problems might stem from an undetected ear infection or vision issues, and a purely behavioral intervention would miss the mark. We need to know the full context.
That makes perfect sense. Once those foundational checks are done and a behavior is identified, how does an analyst decide if it's the right behavior to target for change? What makes a behavior socially significant?
This is where accountability comes in. Because behavior analysts have effective tools for change, we must ensure the goals and rationale for assessment are open to critical examination by the clients, their families, and society. We don't select target behaviors solely for the convenience of others or to maintain the status quo. The central question is, quote, to what extent will the proposed behavior change improve the person's life experience, end quote. Hawkins, in 1984, introduced the concept of habilitation, which he defined as the degree to which a person's repertoire maximizes short and long-term reinforcers for that individual and others, and minimizes short and long-term punishers. A behavior that meets this standard is truly useful and habilitative.
Habilitation sounds like a powerful guiding principle. Can you elaborate on some of the key questions behavior analysts ask to determine if a behavior is truly habilitative and socially significant?
Certainly. There are several critical questions. First, will the behavior produce reinforcement in the client's natural environment after treatment ends? This is the relevance of behavior rule by Ayalon and Osrin from 1968, meaning the behavior must likely be reinforced in the natural environment to be maintained. Second, is it a necessary prerequisite for a more complex and useful skill? For example, teaching phonemic awareness is critical for reading acquisition. Third, will it increase access to environments where other important behaviors can be learned? We call these access behaviors. Think of teaching school-appropriate behavior to help a student integrate into a general education classroom. Fourth, will changing the behavior lead others to interact with the client more appropriately? Sometimes an indirect benefit, like a child doing chores, can improve parent-child interactions, leading to more support in other areas, such as academics.
So it's not just about the individual's direct behavior, but how it impacts their broader ecosystem. Are there particular types of behaviors that are considered especially impactful for future learning and development?
Absolutely. This brings us to behavioral cusps and pivotal behaviors. A behavioral cusp, as described by Rosales Ruiz and Baer in 1997, is a new behavior that opens the door to an array of new contingencies and reinforcers that weren't available before. Think of crawling or learning to read. Once a child can crawl, a whole new world of exploration and interaction opens up. This isn't just a component skill, it profoundly expands their repertoire. Pivotal behaviors, on the other hand, are behaviors that, once learned, produce widespread, untrained modifications in other adaptive behaviors. Researchers Kogel and his colleagues, for instance, have shown that teaching self-initiation to children with autism can lead to improvements in many other areas, like asking questions and diverse language use.
That's a powerful distinction. So cusps open up new environments, and pivotal behaviors trigger a cascade of other positive changes. What about the idea of age appropriateness? How does that factor into selecting target behaviors?
It's fundamental. The principle of normalization, from Wolfensberger in 1972, states that we should use progressively more typical environments and expectations to maintain behaviors that are as culturally normal as possible. This means avoiding demeaning choices, like teaching an adult with developmental disabilities to play with dolls. Instead, we select adaptive behaviors that will be reinforced in a typical social context, such as teaching a 17-year-old leisure skills, like sports or hobbies, rather than playing with toy trucks. This maximizes their chances of social integration and continued learning.
That highlights a profound ethical responsibility. If a behavior is deemed undesirable and needs to be reduced, is it enough to just eliminate it?
Definitely not. This is addressed by the fair pair rule. You should never plan to reduce or eliminate a behavior without first determining an adaptive behavior to replace it, and then designing an intervention to teach that replacement. Maladaptive behaviors often serve a function for the individual, providing reinforcers or helping them avoid punishers. Simply removing it without providing an alternative is non-constructive. Golddiamond, in 1974, advocated for a constructional approach, focusing on building new repertoires rather than just eliminating existing ones. If you can't make a strong case for a positive replacement, you haven't made a compelling case for eliminating the original behavior.
That's a very practical and humane rule. What about the trap of targeting behaviors that seem related to the problem, but aren't the problem itself, or even mistaking talk for actual behavior?
Those are both common pitfalls. Sometimes we target a related behavior, like increasing on-task behavior, when the real goal is improved work output. A student can appear on task, quietly sitting with materials, but still produce no work. The behavior analyst must ask, is this behavior what the instructional program is really all about? Similarly, we must distinguish between what people say and what they do. Non-behavioral therapies often focus on verbal statements as reflecting inner states, but as Skinner pointed out in 1953, knowing and doing aren't the same. A gambler might verbalize their understanding of their problem and promise to stop, but still continue to bet. Unless verbal behavior is the problem, like making self-effacing comments, our focus is on observable, functional actions.
So the behavior has to be tangible, observable, and directly linked to the desired outcome. You also mentioned earlier that goals like weight loss aren't behaviors themselves. How do behavior analysts handle such complex goals?
It's about breaking them down. Losing weight isn't a single behavior. It's the product of behaviors like reduced food consumption and increased exercise. Earning higher grades is the product of practicing skills, getting feedback, and studying. Behavior analysts help clients achieve these broader goals by identifying the specific, observable behaviors that lead to that product. For broader, more general goals like being more successful or having more friends, which are really labels for patterns of responding, the analyst works with the client to define the personal behaviors that, when summed up, will result in their desired quality of life. The target behaviors must be functional.
Once a list of eligible target behaviors is established, how do you then prioritize them? With so many factors, it must be challenging to decide what to tackle first.
It is. We use a set of 9 key questions to guide prioritization. First and foremost, does the behavior pose any danger to the client or others? If so, that takes first priority. Then we consider how many opportunities the person will have to use a new skill, or how often a problem behavior occurs. A chronic problem takes precedence over sporadic ones. We also look at whether changing the behavior will produce higher rates of reinforcement for the person, its importance for future skill development, and if it will reduce negative attention from others. An interesting one is whether the new behavior will produce reinforcement for significant others. As Hawkins noted in 1984, seeing a 19-year-old with severe intellectual disabilities learn to flush a toilet, for example, is incredibly reinforcing for a parent, and that's a valid consideration.
Those are profound considerations, especially the impact on significant others. What about the practicalities, like the likelihood of success or the cost involved?
Yes, those are critical. We ask, how likely is success in changing this behavior? This involves looking at existing research, the practitioner's own experience, the ability to control environmental variables, and the available resources to implement and maintain the intervention. Finally, we consider the cost. This isn't just monetary, it includes the client's time. If teaching a fine motor skill consumes so much of a child's day that it prevents learning communication or self-help skills, then that fine motor goal might be too costly. Often, we use a ranking matrix, like the one adapted from Dardig and Heward in 1981, where each potential behavior is scored on these criteria to help reach a consensus among all stakeholders involved.
So once a target behavior is selected and prioritized, the next crucial step is defining it clearly. What makes a good target behavior definition in applied behavior analysis? And are there different types?
A good definition must be clear, objective, and concise. It needs to describe the behavior in a way that allows for accurate and reliable measurement. We primarily use 2 types, function-based and topography-based. A function-based definition classifies responses by their common effect on the environment. For instance, hand-mouthing could be defined as any behavior resulting in contact of the finger's hand or wrist with the mouth, lips, or tongue. This definition encompasses all relevant forms of the behavior because the outcome is what matters. It's often simpler and more concise. On the other hand, a topography-based definition identifies instances by the shape or form of the behavior. We use this when we don't have direct access to the functional outcome or when the function can't be relied upon. An example would be defining a correct golf swing by the position and movement of the club and the golfer's body, rather than just whether the ball lands on the green, because a bad swing can sometimes get lucky.
That distinction between function and form is very important. What are the universal characteristics of a strong written definition?
Hawkins and Dobbs in 1977 outlined 3 key characteristics that are still valid. First, the definition must be objective, referring only to observable characteristics of the behavior. We translate any inferential terms into objective ones. Second, it must be clear so that experienced observers can read and paraphrase it accurately. It needs to be unambiguous. Third, it must be complete, delineating the boundaries of what is and isn't an instance of the response, guiding observers in all situations, and leaving little to judgment. Ultimately, a good definition should allow you to count the behavior, enable a stranger to know exactly what to look for, and not be easily broken down into smaller, more specific components. Researchers like Baer have also emphasized that, for applied contexts, definitions must be situation-specific to address the specific concerns of the client.
So, selecting and precisely defining the target behavior is paramount. But once that's established, how do behavior analysts determine how much change is enough? When do they know the intervention has been truly successful and the program can conclude?
That's about setting criteria for behavior change and social validity. We don't just want any change, but meaningful change. Van Houten, in 1979, made a strong case for specifying desired outcome criteria before intervention begins. This prevents terminating treatment when performance is either too low or too high for optimal functioning. It provides socially validated standards. We can determine these standards by assessing the performance of highly competent people or by experimentally manipulating different levels of performance to see what yields optimal results. Setting these objective, predetermined goals helps guide the process, eliminates disagreements about effectiveness, and ensures that the change genuinely improves the person's life in a socially acceptable way.
It's clear that this process is incredibly rigorous and thoughtful, far beyond just trying to stop an undesirable behavior. The meticulous approach to selecting, defining, and prioritizing target behaviors in applied behavior analysis, as outlined by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, Inc., ensures that interventions are not only effective, but also truly meaningful for the individual and those around them.
Precisely. It's about empowering individuals through targeted, functional, and socially significant change.
If you found this discussion illuminating, share it with someone interested in understanding how behavior can be purposefully and positively transformed.